Using the same composition as the Zeus, Daniel French made the Lincoln statue out of 28 pieces of marble. Phidias had been meticulous in his study of light, but Daniel French discovered on a dull day his sculpture looked flat. He had to install an elaborate lighting setup. The scale of his sculpture was also criticized, this time for being too small. Daniel French had to double its dimensions to satisfy his commissioners. Even then, the Lincoln statue was only half the height of Phidias's Zeus. Over 450 years after Phidias's world wonder was made, Roman soldiers and workmen arrived with special orders from the Emperor Caligula. He had instructed them to bring the statue back to Rome, so he could put his own head on it. Legend recalls the statue let out such a loud cackle of laughter. The scaffolding collapsed and the workmen fled. Luckily for them, the ruthless emperor was assassinated before they returned to Rome, empty-handed. By 391 AD, the Christian church banned pagan cults and closed the temples. The Olympic Games ceased, and the great sanctuary of Olympia fell into disrepair. When the Zeus was 800 years old, it was bought up by Luasus, an imperial chamberlain from Constantinople, and installed in his palace art collection there. Phidias's world wonder would not survive for long. A fire destroyed the palace and the collection, cremating the finest statue of all time. The influence of Greek art and architecture spread into Persia, an enemy of Greece. At the western tip of the Persian Empire lay the once great city of Halicarnassus. It is now the small resort of Bodrum, lying in present-day Turkey. At first it appears an unlikely site for a world wonder. But in the 4th century BC, this was the capital of a powerful sea empire. Inland from the harbor lie the ruins of a tomb, the most extraordinary building ever constructed. It stood the height of a 14-story building, combined an assortment of styles, and was covered with statues. It has left us the word mausoleum, used to describe monumental tombs ever since. Its style has been copied around the world, from the Freemasons' Lodge in Washington, D.C., to the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne, Australia. The creation of this incredible structure was down to the vision of one of history's little-known yet extraordinary figures, King Mausolus. A Persian governor, or satrap, he became king of this area, known as Caria. Mausolus's unusual behavior included marrying one of his sisters, Artemisia. Erratic and headstrong, he founded a dynasty upon tyrannical control.
Mausolus married his elder sister Artemisia, which is a very curious thing to do because brother-sister marriage does not seem to have existed in the family before his generation.
From the day he became king in 377 BC, Mausolus fiercely protected his kingdom. The ruins of the Mindus Gate are all that remain of his grand defensive walls, which stretched for 7 miles around the city. He also built up a navy of 100 ships.
In the Persian tradition, he had a fortress palace, which is believed to have occupied the site currently where the castle is. Mausolus is obviously a very powerful, dominant figure, successful politically and victorious in war.
His forces stood poised to repel any Greek attack. Yet Mausolus openly welcomed Greek culture. Deluded by visions of his own grandeur, he planned the construction of a vast tomb. He chose a Greek architect to design it. His name was Pythias. He was unknown and unconventional.
We don't know exactly where he came from, but he was very much a pioneering theoretical architect, probably the most important theoretical architect of the 4th century BC. He had very strong views on what was appropriate in architectural design and what was not.
The Persians had a tradition of building tombs. Mausolus followed the example of the Persian king Cyrus the Great. But Mausolus's tomb would be far grander. Pythias designed for him an extraordinary building. It defied the conventional styles of the day. Apart from the Great Pyramid, it stood twice the height of any known building in the Western world, 14 stories high. The tomb would be unique. It would incorporate different styles from different countries. On the top, and never attempted before in architecture, a vast statue. Below, a stepped roof, inspired by the Egyptian pyramids. Beneath were Greek columns from temple architecture. Under these, giant statues resembling friezes, another architectural innovation. At the base was a tomb chamber. This alone used over 12,000 tons of stone. Mausolus gave orders for his tomb to be built on top of an existing royal burial site. Because of the scale of the tomb, this choice of location presented problems. The mausoleum needed foundations dug to a depth of 20 feet. They soon flooded. Having drained them, Pythias increased stability by joining the masonry together. Iron clamps, or dovetails, were used to secure each block to the next, and dowels were fitted between the courses. To assemble the columns, a hole was cut in the base of each, allowing iron connecting bars to join onto the next section. This technique is still used today.
These blocks have been banded together so that they get strength from each other. The ancients also realized that for stone blocks to share the weight more effectively, particularly on a large structure, they needed to be clamped or doweled together. If there was a weakness in the foundation, for example, then the building could cope with it better.
The mausoleum became a world wonder because of the statues adorning it, over twice life-size. These heroic figures stood high up on ledges and weighed many tons.
By the time that the mausoleum is being built, great strides had been made in the development of cranes and siege engines, massive timber constructions on wheels capable of lifting dead weights to a height of 140 feet.
We take it for granted that we can use machinery to help us on our construction sites. This beam weighs about 1.5 tons. It was the invention of the crane by the ancients that enabled them, and now us, to lift heavy weights high onto a building quickly and with great precision.
The heaviest statue sat on the very top of the mausoleum. It was an enormous sculpture of Mausolus and Artemisia in a chariot, pulled by 4 horses. This revolutionary idea of putting a statue on the top of a building has been copied since in triumphal arches and monuments. Mausolus never saw his completed tomb. He died in 352 BC. His body was interred within the mausoleum. But Artemisia, his sister and widow, would prove to be more formidable than Mausolus himself. After the death of Mausolus, Artemisia became queen. Her rise to power was unprecedented in the Western world. she continued to oversee the construction of the tomb. Throughout her short reign, she demonstrated her strength. Her bravery in war led the Persian king Xerxes to exclaim that his men had become women and his women men.
There is the famous story that the Rhodians decided to attack Halicarnassus after the death of Mausolus, when Artemisia was in control, thinking presumably they could easily overthrow a feeble woman. But she outwitted them and in fact captured them, and then returned to Rhodes with the Halicarnassian fleet and captured Rhodes.
Although she appeared to be invincible, her brother's death had weakened her spirit. Her decline was so tragic it was later romanticized by Renaissance artists.
She seems to have been completely besotted with her elder brother, to the extent that even after his death she is supposed to have mixed some of the ashes of his remains with her wine and drunk it. Possibly this is one reason why she didn't outlive him by many years.
Artemisia ruled for just 2 years before she died. She was interred alongside Mausolus, her brother and husband. They were carried away to the next world in their chariot. The mausoleum was finally finished after Artemisia's death. Her younger brother and sister also married before the dynasty died out. The mausoleum remained an object of admiration until the 15th century, when an earthquake destroyed much of it. The stone blocks were used for rebuilding the castle of St. John in the harbor. Most of the statues, which had made the mausoleum a world wonder, were thrown into lime kilns to make cement. "100 miles up the Persian coast from Halicarnassus stood the largest marble temple ever constructed. It had been built at Ephesus, the wealthiest city in Asia Minor and the largest port on the Aegean. The temple, dedicated to the goddess Artemis, attracted pilgrims who flocked here to visit her cult shrine. Artemis was a mother goddess, her many breasts symbolizing the fertility of women. King Croesus, renowned for his wealth, financed the building of a temple to her in 550 BC. The architect chosen to build it was Chersiphron. Although he was highly trained in temple construction, this commission was on a scale never before attempted.
One of the interesting things about temples such as the temple at Ephesus are that they are among the earliest works of Greek architecture on any real scale.
Chersiphron may well have visited the temples of Thebes in Egypt and been inspired by the forests of columns there. His temple of Artemis would be built entirely from marble and have 126 giant columns. Chersiphron's first challenge was to ensure a constant supply of enormous blocks of marble. The quarries were 7 miles from the construction site, and some marble blocks could weigh as much as 40 tons. Engineer Scott Steedman has examined the difficulties of moving them.
There's a lot of controversy about how the ancients moved heavy stones. We know that they dragged them, of course, but when you drag a stone, you have to overcome a huge amount of friction from the weight of the stone on its runners underneath. So if you want a system that doesn't involve dragging, then you may be able to rock them, or even to roll them. This is a mock-up of a rocking device where the stone is strapped in between 2 large wooden rockers. This is a very efficient system of overcoming friction, and you can see just how easy it is to move even a heavy object. You could maneuver it, you could spin it, you could pull it up a ramp with considerably fewer men.